Back in 2019, my friend Jackson and I shared a passion for exploring abandoned places. We weren't the type to get into trouble or do anything too dangerous, so we usually focused on finding spots that were a bit off the beaten path, away from the city in quieter, more remote areas. One day, we came across a thread on Reddit about a fire lookout tower. It was posted in a community dedicated to abandoned places in our state, but the original poster, OP, didn't include any specific details. It seemed like they wanted to keep the location a secret, so I decided to reach out to them directly. After a little back and forth, I finally convinced the OP to give me the coordinates, but only on the condition that I wouldn't share them with anyone else. We checked the spot on the map, and sure enough, there was a structure marked in that area. It all seemed legit, but there wasn't much else online about it. No other posts, no photos, just complete silence. It felt like this place had been forgotten by everyone. So we packed up and decided to head out there early on a Monday morning. The journey wasn't exactly easy. There were no trails, no clear path, just our GPS guiding the way. The forest had a weird vibe too. If Jackson hadn't been with me, I would have seriously considered turning back. The place just felt off. Jackson said he had the same feeling, but we pushed on. We kept walking, convinced we'd eventually find the tower, but it wasn't until we were less than a minute away from the lookout that we even knew we were in the right place. Up until then, there were no signs of a trail, no paths, nothing to tell us we were heading the right way, just thick trees and the odd sensation that we were being watched. And then, out of nowhere, we stumbled into a clearing. There it was, just 30 feet away, a fire lookout tower. It wasn't exactly what we were expecting, but I was just glad we had finally found it. The GPS had led us there, and that was enough for me. This tower wasn't perched on stilts like we thought it would be. Instead, it was more of a small cabin sitting on top of a hill overlooking the forest. We circled it for a bit, taking it all in. The wood on the cabin was weathered and gray with splintered edges. The windows were either shattered or so filthy that it was impossible to see through them. One side of the roof had even collapsed in, and the whole place seemed like it had shifted slightly off its foundation. Jackson was practically buzzing with excitement, but I still couldn't shake that uneasy feeling from earlier in the woods. I didn't want to spoil the moment for him, though. We had come all this way, so I kept quiet. Jackson knocked on the door and pushed it open. We stepped inside. Inside the cabin, it was pitch black. Despite the windows being on almost every side, the fog and grime I mentioned earlier blocked out almost all the light. The place was cluttered with random junk, old tools, a busted lantern, and even beer cans that looked like they'd been there for decades. But the strangest thing was a piece of paper taped to the far wall. It really stood out because it was clean and fresh, as if someone had just put it there recently. The note only had 3 words: "Hope you're happy." I showed it to Jackson, and we both stared at it, puzzled. It had to be some prank, right? Probably the Reddit user who posted about the place, leaving a cryptic message just to mess with us, knowing we'd show up. But if it wasn't a joke, the note came off as a bit passive-aggressive, which felt strange. The sun was setting, so I decided to shut the door, and we got ready for the night. I pulled out the camping stove and started boiling some water to make ramen for dinner. But something about that night just didn't sit right with me. We didn't talk much. I made the food, we ate, and then we just sat there in silence, listening to the wind making the walls creak. It was unusual for both of us to be so quiet. It wasn't like we were uncomfortable with each other. It just felt like there was this heavy, unsettling vibe in the air. It was like this sense of dread that I couldn't shake. I can't say for sure if Jackson felt the same, but he didn't say anything either, so I have to think he did. Eventually, we both crawled into our sleeping bags and drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, everything was pitch black. I could hear the faint creaks of the cabin, but something felt wrong. I rolled over and immediately noticed Jackson's sleeping bag was empty. I shot up, looking around. "Jackson?" It was dead quiet. I froze for a moment, then called his name again. That's when I heard a thud. It came from somewhere above us, against the wood. Then another thud. I looked up, straining my ears to listen. The thuds were slow and deliberate, moving across the ceiling. I couldn't explain it. Suddenly, the door opened, and Jackson walked in, nearly giving me a heart attack. He seemed surprised to see me awake, but I quickly motioned for him to be quiet. The noise stopped as soon as he stepped in. He said he had just gone outside to take a leak. I asked if he'd seen anything on the roof, and he gave me this look like I was out of my mind. We went outside to check, but there was nothing up there. At that point, I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. We went back inside, crawled into our sleeping bags, and somehow managed to get some more sleep. The next day, things still felt off. It was hard to put my finger on what it was, but everything just felt too still, too quiet. Jackson and I spent most of the day wandering around, exploring the area, hoping to find something else interesting. But we didn't find anything. The forest seemed endless, with the same half-dead trees stretching for miles in every direction. As the sun began to set again, we made our way back to the lookout tower, eager to get inside and settle down for the night. But just as Jackson reached for the door to close it, he suddenly froze. I glanced over at him. He stood there motionless, eyes locked on something in the distance. Then he called my name, his voice barely above a whisper, and motioned for me to come over. I walked over to him and peeked out the door. Standing about 40 feet away, right at the edge of the clearing where the trees began, was a man. He had long, unkempt hair and a scraggly beard, and was dressed in a worn-out gray flannel with a rifle slung over his shoulder. He looked like he was some sort of hunter, but what really made my stomach churn was the expression on his face. His eyes were lifeless, almost empty, like there was nothing behind them. "Hey, can we help you? You okay?" I called out to him. He didn't respond. He just stared at us for a few more seconds, then turned without a word and walked off into the woods. Jackson and I exchanged uneasy glances. Neither of us knew what to make of that encounter. We went inside and started cooking, trying to shake off the strange feeling. The conversation shifted to our plan to leave first thing in the morning and how we'd never recommend anyone coming here. But in the middle of our talk, a shadow suddenly passed across Jackson's face. I whipped around and looked out the window behind me. Through the grimy glass, I couldn't make out much, but there was definitely a shape, a figure, moving along the outer wall. Jackson didn't say anything, but I could tell he saw it too. The figure circled around to the door. My heart was racing. There was a long pause, and then 3 soft knocks echoed through the cabin. Jackson immediately jumped up and slammed the boat lock down. But just as we thought it was over, 3 heavy thuds slammed against the door, rattling it. We froze. Neither of us moved, completely paralyzed with fear. After those final knocks, there was nothing, just silence. There were no sounds, no footsteps, no voices, no shadows. I honestly don't know how long we sat there, just waiting in silence. Eventually, Jackson unlocked the door and cautiously opened it, but there was nothing and no one out there. We spent the entire night awake, both of us on edge, feeling an overwhelming sense of paranoia. We tried to make sense of what had happened, wondering if it was the hunter from earlier. Sure, he had looked strange, but this didn't feel like it was him. It felt like something else entirely. I know that probably sounds insane, but I can't explain it any other way. It was like we weren't just dealing with a person. There was something else in the woods with us. When the sun finally came up, we wasted no time packing up and leaving the cabin behind. The walk back through the woods felt just as unsettling as the night before. It was as though we were being watched the entire time. As soon as we made it out to the open, I immediately checked Reddit to see if the original poster, the one who had given us the coordinates, had ever mentioned anything strange about the lookout tower. But the post was gone, and the account had been deleted. Honestly, I think the guy had experienced something similar, maybe even worse, which is why he left that cryptic note that said, Hope you're happy. Jackson and I are still close friends, and we still explore abandoned places together. We've had other creepy experiences, but nothing comes close to what happened during those 2 nights at the lookout tower. To this day, we still don't know exactly what we encountered there, but whatever it was, it's something we'll never forget. For privacy reasons, I'm keeping my name anonymous, but this all went down about 5 years ago. At that time, I was traveling with my dog, Rocky. I know it's a simple name, but I chose it because I found him in a mountain range 3 years before, and it just felt right. He was a mix of Australian Shepherd, and the vets guessed he was around 6 or 7 years old when I first took him in. There wasn't any information about his background, and after weeks of searching for his owner with no luck, I decided to adopt him. Rocky quickly became my sidekick, joining me on all kinds of hikes and backpacking trips throughout the year. We both loved the adventure. The trip I'm talking about wasn't anything too wild, just a simple 1 day in, 1 day out backpacking trek along a firebreak trail that led to an old lookout tower. I didn't find much updated information about the place. The best I could dig up were some ancient rules about it being a first-come, first-served shelter with a 3-night limit, but most of that info was outdated. Honestly, I didn't care much, as I wasn't planning on spending the night in the tower anyway. The plan was to reach the ridge, take in the view, and then hike a few more miles to a creek where there was a small campsite. But that plan went south when, about 30 minutes from the tower, we were hit with dark, ominous clouds. We hustled to the tower, and from the lookout ledge, I could see a major storm brewing across the valley, heading right toward us. I wasn't too worried about camping in the storm. I could handle that. The real issue was whether or not we could make it to the campsite and set up before the rain hit. Just as I was debating what to do, the rain started pouring down on the lookout tower, and the decision was made for me. We took shelter inside the tower to wait out the storm. Once inside, I took a better look at the place. It was pretty much what I had expected. White paint peeling off the walls, a rusted stove in the corner, and other than that, completely empty. There wasn't even an old mattress or anything, just the bare, empty space you usually find in public forest shelters. Within minutes, the storm intensified. The rain was coming down so hard that I couldn't see the trees outside the windows, and the wind was cutting through the cracks in the wood, making it feel colder inside. The tower itself seemed to sway with the wind, shifting a little every time a gust hit. It didn't look like the storm was going to let up anytime soon. I spread out my sleeping bag to make the space more comfortable, then set up my dinner and prepared a freeze-dried meal. Rocky, though, wasn't handling the storm well. He couldn't settle down, pacing nervously near the door with his tail tucked, whining quietly. He wasn't fond of storms, but this one had him even more unsettled than usual. Maybe it was the tower swaying or the height of it. Who knows? I called him over to sit by me so I could comfort him, hoping to calm him down. As soon as he was settled, I started hearing something odd. It was a faint, hollow thump, like something metal moving under the floor. It wasn't loud, and it blended in with the sound of the rain, only becoming noticeable when the downpour would briefly slow. After a couple of minutes, though, it faded away. I'm not sure if it stopped or if I just got used to it. Eventually, I settled down, and Rocky curled up in the sleeping bag with me. The sound of the rain and the rumble of the thunder actually became kind of soothing, and I fell asleep. The next thing I knew, I woke up, checked my watch. It was just after 2 a.m., and something immediately felt off. The storm sounds were gone. It was dead silent. I sat up, and that's when I realized Rocky wasn't in the sleeping bag anymore. He was over by the door, staring at me with that look, like he needed to go out, and quietly whining again. I paused for a moment, then slipped on my shoes and grabbed the flashlight. I opened the door, stepping out into the night with him. We walked down the creaky steps, and I let him wander out into the field between the tower and the edge of the forest. After hours of constant rain, the eerie stillness of the forest felt unsettling. I stayed close to the tower, keeping the flashlight trained on Rocky as he wandered off to do his business. That's when I heard it. A faint metallic squeak, barely audible, like the sound of metal shifting with the wind. I turned around and directed my light under the tower, where I spotted what looked like a metal cellar door, similar to the ones old houses sometimes have for storage. I assumed it must have been used for storage when the tower was active, maybe for firewood or tools. But then, I remembered those strange metal thuds I had heard the night before, and deep down, I knew those sounds had to be coming from those cellar doors opening and closing, or maybe something moving around inside. I kept the flashlight on it as I approached and carefully lifted one of the doors to peek inside. There were about 5 or 6 steps leading down, not very deep, but what caught my attention were the fresh, wet mud stains on each step, like something had recently gone up and down them. Before I could look any longer, Rocky suddenly let out a sharp, terrified bark. It was enough to make me slam the door shut and spin around. Just in time, I saw something move in the tree line, just beyond where Rocky was standing. I immediately called him back to me, then sprinted up the tower stairs and into the safety of the lookout. Thankfully, I hadn't fully unpacked, so I quickly rolled up my sleeping bag and clipped it to my backpack. Someone was out there, watching us, and I wasn't sticking around to find out why. I made sure Rocky stayed close as we hurried out of the tower and back to the base. But before we left, something made me turn around. I shone the flashlight back under the tower toward the cellar. When I looked back, the cellar doors were wide open. I glanced down at Rocky, and his gaze was fixed on the cellar, his body tense with fear. Whatever was down there, he could feel it too. We didn't waste any time. We got out of there fast, back onto the firebreak trail, and didn't stop until we'd covered about a mile. The rain started up again soon after, but by then we were moving at a slower pace, and eventually we made it back. The next morning, I called the Forest Service. What I heard made everything even worse. The ranger told me that the lookout tower was no longer in service and was off limits to the public. He didn't give me much detail, but from the little things he said, I got the sense that there had been enough strange occurrences in that area to make them shut the tower down. That explained why I couldn't find any current information about it. Looking back, there are plenty of theories I could come up with about what happened, but none of them are reassuring. The least frightening explanation is that someone had been living in the cellar of the abandoned tower for who knows how long. But that still doesn't explain why they suddenly left in the middle of the night, or why they were watching us from the trees. It's been some time now, and I've accepted that I'll probably never get the answers, but I'm sure of one thing. If we hadn't left when we did, something else might have happened. This took place nearly 30 years ago. I'm older now, but back when I was in my 20s, I spent my summers working with the Forest Ranger Service as a fire lookout. I did this job for almost 9 consecutive summers. It was paid work, and since I was in college and had the summers off, I absolutely loved it. Honestly, I might have even done it for free. The job itself was pretty straightforward. Basically, every hour I'd jot down a few data points like the temperature, wind speed, humidity, and of course, keeping an eye out for any fires. Beyond that, I was left alone, free to do whatever I wanted. I'd often take long walks along the trails around the lookout tower and just take in the scenery. Over the years, I got pretty skilled in the woods. Aside from one strange night, nothing ever really felt out of the ordinary. The days always blended together, peaceful and relaxing. I don't recall much from the early part of this day, as it was just like any other. Even hours after sunset, everything was quiet. I finished my last check-in for the night, radioed in to let the ranger station know I was clocking out, and called it a day. The overnight ranger, Brady, was usually on duty when I was off. I didn't see him often in person, but we talked nearly every night. He was the one I'd contact for any important updates or issues. After grabbing some food and relaxing for a bit, I decided to step out onto the balcony and enjoy the night sky. It didn't take long before I spotted a bright, flickering light down below the tower, just behind the trees, maybe a quarter of a mile away. There were too many trees to get a clear view, but I could tell it was a campfire by the color and the way it flickered. Now, there was a campfire ban in place due to dry conditions, so this was serious and needed to be addressed immediately. I quickly radioed Brady, asking if he knew anything about permits or who might be out there. Brady didn't have any answers. He told me that no camping permits had been issued for that area that night, and he seemed just as puzzled as I was. I gave him the exact location of the fire, which was way too close to my lookout station for comfort. He told me, since it was so nearby, to simply go tell them to put the fire out, not to worry about making them leave, even though they didn't have permission to be there. So I grabbed my radio and flashlight and headed down the tower stairs, starting my walk toward the fire. Honestly, I wasn't all that concerned. It was only about a 5-minute walk, and I figured I'd handle it quickly and easily. I wasn't there to kick anyone out, just to make sure the fire was extinguished. When I reached the spot, though, it wasn't exactly what I was expecting. There was no campsite, just the fire burning with no one around it. And it wasn't even a small campfire. It was a full-on bonfire, just a stack of logs blazing on the ground. It was almost like whoever started it was trying to get my attention on purpose. I called out a few times, but there was no reply. I started to feel uneasy, shining my flashlight around the dark woods, trying to make sense of it all. The silence was unsettling. No birds, no rustling, nothing. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I radioed Brady again, explaining that there was no one around and that I thought this might just be some sort of prank to lure me out there. But when I waited for a response, there was nothing, just static. And that was strange. In all my years of doing this, I'd never had a time where I didn't get a response. Something felt off. A cold chill ran down my spine as I quickly kicked over the logs and stomped out the fire. Then, without wasting any more time, I hurried back toward the lookout station, my mind racing. As I walked through the woods, I couldn't help but wonder why I'd even listened to Brady in the first place. When I finally got back to the lookout tower, I rushed up the stairs, and that's when my stomach sank. My heart skipped a beat. The place had been completely ransacked. I've never been so terrified in my life. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the main station radio to try reaching Brady again, but there was still no answer. I then called in to report something strange happening. Someone was definitely trespassing and messing with our equipment. I had a choice to make: stay at the lookout or hike out of there. Despite the darkness, I knew staying put, with no escape if whoever was out there came back, was the more dangerous option. The trail to the ranger station was well marked, 3 miles down, then another mile to the road. I didn't take much with me and rushed out as quickly as I could. That hour spent walking through the woods felt like an eternity. The silence was deafening, and each step I took seemed louder than the last, like I was drawing attention to myself. But when I finally saw the dim lights of the ranger station in the distance, I felt a small wave of relief. I called out for Brady as I neared the station, but when I got closer, I saw the door wide open. I went inside, but Brady was nowhere to be found. It looked like he'd stepped outside for some reason, maybe to check on a noise, and just vanished. I wasted no time. I bolted for the road and didn't stop running until I met the cops a few minutes later. They spent days combing through the area, but Brady was never found. It became clear to me that the fire was just a distraction. Whoever was behind this must have done something to draw Brady out of the cabin, but what exactly that was, I can't say. The state kept everything under wraps, though. It all took place in a popular tourist park, and I guess it was easy for them to keep it quiet back then. You'd be surprised how often things like this would go unnoticed, especially when the state didn't want it getting out. That was the last summer I worked there. After I left, I don't think anyone else took over that lookout tower. The listing for the position disappeared soon after. And even all these years later, I can't help but wonder what really happened that night, and just how close I came to disappearing like Brady did.